Okay, so this is going to be a review for pages 26 to 31, and it's all about cell anatomy. So, a cell is the smallest unit of a living thing. Everything can get broken down into smaller parts and smaller pieces. A pizza is a pizza, but you can break it into the toppings and the cheese and the sauce and the spices and the dough, and it just keeps getting into smaller and smaller parts. Well, a human is the same way, where all of ourselves is made up of systems, and our systems are made up of organs, and our organs are made up of tissue, and our tissue is made up of cells. Now, a cell is the smallest thing it can break down into, but a cell is very important. It's got a lot of jobs and it multiplies. It's what makes things get bigger. It's what makes things heal and all sorts of things. So, the cell, the anatomy of the cell, which means like the how it's built, is very important. Now, in humans and in animals, the cells are round. So for right now, we're going to talk about round cells. The outermost layer of that cell is called a cell membrane, and it is what is protecting all of the things that are happening on the inside of the cell. Then the next thing that you're going to find is cytoplasm. It's kind of like a jelly fluid liquid stuff that's filled inside the cell. Now, all of the parts of the cell, the different things that we're going to talk about, those are called organelles. And each one of those organelles has a job to do, and those organelles are literally floating around inside the cytoplasm. So the first organelle that we're going to talk about is on page 27, and it's called the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria is the workhouse, it's the power horse of the cell. So nothing works without fuel. It needs energy to make it work, and that energy comes from fuel. So in your car needs gas, it needs fuel to make energy. Well, your engine in your car literally turns the gas into energy. So what in your body, in your cell, is turning the fuel into energy? Well, the fuel that comes in is things like glucose. It's a type of sugar. That's going to be a fuel. What turns that into energy is the mitochondria. It's literally turning the fuel into energy so that things can actually happen. Now, on page 28, the next organelle that's talked about is a lysosome. And there's a cute little picture of a policeman to remind you that they're kind of on patrol. So the lysosomes have two jobs. They're protecting and they're breaking down. So a protective type scenario would be if a germ or something that isn't supposed to be there, mutation, if that were to try to come into the cell and hurt that cell or break that cell down, the lysosomes are what protect the cell from that happening. The other thing it does is sometimes something comes in and there's too much of it. So when you eat an apple, you're getting all sorts of vitamins and nutrients. You're not just getting apple vitamins, you're getting all of the vitamins and the glucose and the carbohydrates and everything that's involved. What breaks that all down is your lysosomes. So not only do they protect against bad things, they break down things that come in that your body can't process. So a lot of times it will break down the chemicals that the cell membrane needs. So lysosomes are protecting and breaking down things. The Golgi bodies. Now, a Golgi body, your book references that it's kind of like a grocer. It packages things up and sends it on its way. So there are things that your body needs and things that your cell needs to be able to do their jobs. And it's not created in that moment. It's something that's created somewhere else and has to travel to get to that part. So Golgi bodies, they kind of look like pancakes, and they are the thing that packages up what is needed to move to a different part of the cell. They are incredibly important because if they weren't packaged the right way, if they weren't packaged with the other proteins that needed to be packaged with, then it wouldn't perform the job properly. And we'll get into more details about that when we talk about what the different proteins are. But Golgi bodies they package things up to send them on their way to where they're supposed to be. Now, how do they get from being packaged over here to doing their job over there? They need a highway to get there. So the next thing on page 29 is called the endoplasmic reticulum, the ER. Now the ER is like the highway for everything to get around. So the Golgi bodies will travel on the ER to get from one spot to another. The endoplasmic reticulum, the ER. Your book talks about them in terms of being like a delivery truck. They are what's actually doing the transporting. Now, some of the things that are being transported other than Golgi bodies are also ribosomes And we're going to talk about that word again in a few minutes when we get towards the end. But ribosomes is something else that the ER is going to transport. Now, the centriole, the mother of the city. A centriole is a special organelle that helps the cells reproduce. Your entire body is not made up of one cell. It's made up of millions of cells. And the way that that works and the way that that happens is by reproduction. So the cell will literally copy itself and then divide and make 2. And then those will copy and divide and make 4. And then copy and divide and make 8. And they keep on doing. So that's also the way a cut would heal. If you have a cut in your skin is skin cells that needs to repair itself. So it copies and reproduces and repairs itself that way. So the centriole is a special organelle that actually is in charge of the reproduction. So that's a very important organelle. Now the nucleus. The nucleus is another ball inside the cell. So you've got the cell out here, and then you've got another centrally located ball called the nucleus. Now that's the brain of the city. It's also incredibly important because in the nucleus has a membrane. In the nucleus, that is where all of the code and the DNA and the RNA exists. Your chromosomes, which is the code to make you who you are, exists in a safe place and is protected within the nucleus. Now, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, so it's just an acid. And RNA, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes, stands for ribonucleic acid. So there's messenger RNA, and there's all sorts of different terms that we're going to kind of talk about this year. But I just want you to know that that stuff is the code that makes you who you are, and it is stored in the nucleus. So your genes, I'm sure you've heard that word, Genes, your genes. When somebody says, oh, you're tall like your daddy. Well, yep, it's in my genes. Well, sure, that's part of your code. That's protected in the nucleus, and that comes from your DNA. So your DNA is actually 4 different proteins. It is, let me check real quick and see if your book actually talks in this particular part about what it is. It doesn't mention it yet, so I'm not going to get into that yet. But they're made out of 4 different little things called nucleotides, and they link up together in a pattern, and as they do, it starts twisting, and that's what the famous image of a DNA double helix is. It's just a bunch of nucleotides that are kind of linked together that eventually curl. So there's 4 of them. They start with an A, T, C, and G, and we'll talk about that on another date because your book doesn't get into it quite yet. Now the RNA, your DNA tells your body what to make. Your RNA tells it where to go. It tells you what protein. Your DNA is to tell the cells what proteins to make and how to make them. The RNA is what copies it to make it actually happen. So we'll talk more about that when we get into specifically DNA and RNA. There's a whole section in your book that talks about it. Now, that is all like a basic overview of what's happening in the cell. Your job with your diagram is to draw a part of that. So each one of those things I described has a little picture in your book with an image of what it looks like. So I mentioned that Golgi bodies look like pancakes, and the ER, it literally looks like ribbons of string running through the cell. And lysosomes look like little balls. So do ribosomes. They're just smaller. They look like little balls, and they're on the ER. They are literally on the highway. There's also something called a vacuole. V-A-C-U-O-L-E. So it's just a giant storage compartment where it houses all of the waste material. So after your cell does what it needs, there's waste left over. It's kind of like the dump of the cell. Everything needs to get stored somewhere. And there's vacuoles, or these storage units, and they're just kind of like blobs in the middle of it. So all of these things have jobs. Now, a cell is not going to work if it's just a mitochondria. In fact, a cell is not going to work at all unless it has all of its parts, which is why all of the organelles working, which is why a cell is considered the smallest function, the smallest piece of a living thing. Now, very quickly going back to page 26, there is an image of a cell from your body. It's right in the middle, and you can see it kind of broken away, and you can see all the little pieces. Your job is to try to identify all those little parts based on what I just talked about. If you have any questions, don't forget to email me and reach out.